start again. It's a redskin.
Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl BinkiBianca with some more pod talk. And today we're going to be talking about Joe Budden, DJ Academics, and Charlamagne the God. Recently, Joe Budden was a guest on Academics' podcast, Off the Record, and Academics actually posted a clip of that conversation where Joe was actually talking about what happened with his podcast network. I'm not going to play the clip here, but basically, in a nutshell, Joe was saying that he is not interested in the administrative side of things when it comes to running a network, as well as like the managerial side of things, you know, having to deal with creators, helping them to grow their audience, dealing with whatever comes up between the creators themselves, also dealing with punctuality, just things of that nature. He just wasn't interested in, but he learned that by having the network, and I don't think that he would have known that if he hadn't tried to do it. A lot of people have said that Joe actually only created a network because Charlamagne created a network, but actually back in 2018, Joe was on a podcast called Now What with Arian Foster, where he discussed his idea back then even to launch a podcast network. So take a listen.
This is a new phenom. Right. Still, people still don't know how to monetize this shit. People still don't know all the money that's in this shit or how valuable it is.
It's probably one of the most valuable creative contents there is.
The industry still don't want us to. They don't want to tell us neither. Apple still hide all they fucking little podcast metrics.
Man, I was talking to my guy, and like there's this ad agency, and this is just one of them, and they spend over, I think it's like over $80 million a year just on podcast ads. Mm-hmm. Like they give out $80 million a year, and I'm just like, that is insane to me, dog.
See, before I put an ad on my podcast, I'll go call you. I'll go call 5 other my friends with podcasts. And I'll say, hey, why don't we all get together and form a network? And now that same company that I was going to go get an ad for $5,000 on my podcast, I'm going to show them the number of me, you, and all of my friends that do podcasts. And now I'm going to say, hey, my network has over 100 million XYZ. Know what that check looks like?
I'm going to edit that shit out. That's a brilliant idea, though, man. No.
Okay, so interestingly enough there, Joe seemed to understand the value of an actual podcast network as compared to the value of a singular podcast. And funny enough, all of the issues, or a lot of the not all of the issues, because there's a lot, but many of the issues that happened between himself and Charlamagne the God came from the fact that Charlamagne was commenting on Joe's podcast renewal contract situation. Joe had been going on multiple Spotify rants on his podcast, and when they talked about it on the Breakfast Club, Charlamagne made a couple of points. One of them being that Joe is looking at the deals that other people are getting from these DSPs, and he's comparing their deals to whatever he's being offered, and he's feeling he needs more because they're getting offered more than he is. But Joe, at the time, was a singular podcast. So Charlamagne was saying he's not a network. So, like, why is he trying to compare himself to what podcast networks are getting as far as their deals? So that was one of his points. The other point that Charlamagne made was that maybe Joe does not know how to negotiate, or maybe his team is not good at negotiating deals. Joe is worth a lot financially. He's worth a lot of money because he brings eyes to his content. He brings ears to his content. So he's worth a lot, and Charlamagne acknowledged that. But he just was saying, like, you get what you negotiate. And maybe Joe just wasn't doing a good job at negotiating. Now, for whatever reason, that really upset Joe. Joe did put out a tweet saying, Charlamagne, I am a network or something to that effect. Stay tuned. And then a couple days later, Joe went on his podcast and he went off on Charlamagne. Let's take a look.
I heard my good buddy, old pal, the Magneto to my Professor X. I heard Charlamagne go on a little rant, and I was disappointed because all I hear when any of my peers talk is how much they don't know. See, I'm never speaking from ego. I have one, but in matters of business, you have to remove it.
Definitely.
Because you want to make a sound decision. Ego would have me reacting to all of this bullshit y'all out there saying, but I don't, because I know it's from ignorance. I know you don't know, and I know it's my job to tell you. I know that I have done that since the beginning of my career. Went and found something out, came back and told the people. Charlamagne, let me help you. I know that you have this healthy obsession with me. I know that you think we are competing. You might also think that we're fighting the same fight. You would be sadly mistaken in all three of those. This goes back to the Breakfast Club interview with Dame Dash. And he tried to tell y'all, but it went how it went when you're trying to explain something to people who just cannot imagine that.
Yeah.
Charlamagne, you're not gonna get it because I own this. My most valuable, my most powerful, my most accomplished asset, I own it. Ownership. You see all these black people running around preaching ownership, ownership, ownership. There's a reason for it. You, my friend, work for iHeart and have for 10 years. I came in here one day and said, yo, Stephen A. Smith got $10 million a year. I see him on everything. He's doing the finals, Sports Center. He's interviewing athletes. He's fucking talking to Max. He's talking to this person. He's got a radio show. He's doing everything in the world. 10 million? Well, yeah, when you don't own some shit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We got that part. But let's zero in on what it means. Charlamagne, you broke an entire radio station. Number one, morning drive. 10 years in a row. I asked him when I spoke to him, do you think you're paid properly for the work that you've done? How much y'all make up there? You ain't got to answer it. You don't have to answer it. I know, y'all know. Go to sleep and think about it. But 10 years at number one, breaking a radio station, breaking a network, because it's iHeart.
Right.
They also have a podcast division. See, Charlamagne, for me, Joe would never do that because it signifies conflict of interest. Whoa, the radio has a podcast department. No, I'm out of here. I only thought the Spotify shit would make sense because they were fighting with the labels. Let's get them some money and see what they do with it. We synced it. Now we know. And I'm coming back to tell people, like we've done historically. This has always been who we have been. I see people saying, there go Joe burning a bridge again. There's oppression on the bridge. I cannot have somebody with a voice as powerful as you just be misinformed on shit. 10 years, y'all number one. How are you paid? I'm listening to your fucking ads. We're not having the same fight behind the scenes. It looks the same, but it's not the same. Don't be fooled by the cross streets. I'm walking this way. You started your YouTube page in 2019 of August. I'm behind the scenes saying no. You cannot insert SAI into 400 episodes of back catalog. You cannot ruin user experience this way. Know why? Because it's fucking mine. And since you don't understand that, Charlamagne, let me paint a different example for you. Let me come to your house every day and paint over 400 of your favorite sneakers. A different paint every day. Would you let me? You? No, of course you wouldn't let me fucking do that. It's silliness. I'm on the phone with Charlamagne listening to my brother fight for oppression. It don't make sense. And he don't even see it still. It bothers me when I have to waste time to turn around and explain some shit to somebody that's bright. But fine, let's do it. Charlamagne, they ushered your ass right out of the HBO doors. Why? According to you, for something you didn't do. That's oppression. That's what happens when you don't have your own. We're not fighting the same fight at all. Your MTV2 show, where is it? It's gone. Know why it's gone? Because white people said it should be gone. White people didn't see the value in your amazing show, Charlamagne, that you were pulling creators up from Twitter, giving them a look, letting them eat.
It was a good show.
It don't matter if it's good, Rory.
Oh no, I know
if we don't have the power to keep it here.
I know the point, the exact point you're making.
Am I off?
No, not at all.
Get your own.
100%.
You can't, and that's why a lot of you, listen, it's a lot of these racist niggas that play both sides. They know the value is with the blacks, but they won't share with us. They're getting cool with the racists behind the scenes. It's a lot of us that say we want to emulate the Hoves and the Puffs and is that Byron Allen?
Yeah.
The Byron Allens. Mm-hmm. It's a million names I could pull out right now. But the Master P's, the Kanyes, all of the people that had to change status quo to come back and show us how to do it.
Okay, so it's interesting there that at the end that Joe referenced people like Jay-Z and P. Diddy and Master P when talking about business, right? And ownership, and even like Kanye. Those people all partner for their business ventures. Okay, Kanye partnered with Nike at first and then Adidas, who he's still partnered with for Yeezy. Jay-Z has partnered. I believe Rock Nation was part of a partnership with Live Nation or something to that effect. Now, it spun off into different divisions, but that wasn't him just going digging in his pockets and creating. Tidal was the same thing. All of those things are partnerships. Do you think that Diddy built a factory where they're making Ciroc, or did he partner with someone else that was already, in that business? You see what I'm saying? Or even Beyonce. People could probably look at Beyonce and say, you're half of $1 billion couple. Why are you partnering with Adidas to make clothes? Ivy Park, it should just sit alone on its own. But she's partnering. She's leveraging. It just doesn't make any sense why that's seen as a negative. Same thing with Rihanna and Fenty Beauty. But for some reason, with this podcast game, when Joe was talking about it, he was belittling and talking crazy about Charlamagne, like he was so stupid to partner with a company that he worked for 10 years and had a strong business relationship with, that he was stupid to partner with them to create his podcast network, which was one of his things he really wanted to do. How is that stupid? To me, that's smart, because guess what? Charlamagne still has a podcast network and Joe does not. Joe got burned out because Joe tried to do too much on his own. Now, again, Joe did have an idea for a podcast network. He did not only create one in response to Charlamagne's. However, I think he might have rushed putting it out there in response to Charlamagne's announcement. of his own podcast network, Black Effect Network. I do believe that could be possible. But Joe had the idea, as I showed you earlier, from years ago. And even before that interview, he had talked about it. But that's just the one that I could find. But in my mind, Joe launching a podcast network, I would have thought, because I didn't even talk about yet what was on the podcast network, right? So Joe's podcast network consisted of the Joe Budden podcast, a podcast called See the Thing Is, which featured 3 women, Mandy, Bridget Kelly, and Olivia Dope. And then another all-female podcast called Girl, I Guess, with Karen Civil, and I believe her name is Ming Lee, I believe. I apologize if I got her name wrong, but I'm not familiar with her. But those 3 podcasts were the Joe Budden Podcast Network. Those 3. Now, me having been a long time listener of Joe, I would have thought a Joe Budden Podcast Network would have went something like this. Okay, you have the main Joe Budden podcast as the anchor. You spin Rory and Mal off. Now, they're still going to be part of the Joe Budden podcast, but spin them off and give them some more responsibility. Have them do a podcast, just the 2 of them. Then spin Rory off to do his own thing, develop whatever it is that he wants to develop, maybe some kind of music focused, more so R&B, indie artist type thing. Spin Mal off. Maybe he could do something with the sports, because Mal used to be, really talk a lot of sports talk. He could have did his own thing with that. They could have picked up Savon's podcast, because Savon was a longtime employee of the Joe Budden podcast. He also had his own podcast, so why not pick up his podcast, bring that under the network? You know what I mean? Joe could have started a conspiracy podcast, which he used to talk about all the time, which would have been very interesting. I definitely would have tuned in for that, a lot of his listeners, and he would have gotten a great new audience from that. And they even could have made a podcast where they actually literally just talked about the things that they always said they would get to one day, because that was a running theme on the Joe Budden podcast. They would start getting into a subject, and then all of a sudden they would get off and just be like, oh, we'll talk about that later. And people would always say, when are y'all going to talk about A, B, or C, that you said you were going to talk about? So you see, and that's just me talking as a fan of some ideas that could have been part of his network. But Joe launched with 2 all-female podcasts. It just didn't, to me, it did not make sense if he's trying to first leverage the audience that he has, because of course one of the draws of a network is you can have diverse content on there, so you can bring in people from different facets of life and different interests. So it's not a bad idea to have the all-female podcast, but to just have that as the launch of his network, I don't know if that was the best idea. I don't. And like I said, now Joe doesn't have a network, and let's be clear, there was an issue with Olivia Dope, a harassment issue that came up and claimed against Joe from Olivia Dope. She ended up leaving that podcast, See the Thing Is, and eventually she said why. And there was issues as well between her and the other women on the show, and some cattiness and some pettiness, according to her. Okay, now the other 2 ladies, even though they've left the Joe Budden network for the See the Thing Is, they're still doing their thing. They're still going forward with their podcast, just without being on his network. And Joe did make a statement that Karen Civil is still with him, and he said Karen is a writer, right? When he said that to academics. And to me, that implies that if you're not with him, you're not a writer. So I don't know if that was a little low-key shot or whatever at anyone that is not currently with him or not, as far as working with him. But in any case, I just feel like Joe got a little bit in over his head. I think he was competing with someone in a negative way, and someone being Charlamagne, when really it should just be healthy competition. We should drive each other to want to do better and better and better and be the best and be number one. But it doesn't have to be this hateful thing. And I think he kind of turned it into that. So, and he burned himself out. So let me know what you think. Do you think that Joe was actually right, though? Do you think that it should just be 100% ownership? You should do everything on your own and you shouldn't partner with large conglomerates or large companies or anybody with deep pockets to help fund your dreams? You should just do it all yourself. Or do you think Charlamagne had the right idea with partnering and making it work with his money, making it work with their money as well? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.